Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 16 Fantasy Life Ranking Show. I'm Matthew Freedman, Matt F. the Oracle, and I'm here with Ian Hartitz and Dwain McFarland. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the risers, the fallers, the favorites, and our rankings divergences. Ian, it's not just any day, it's today. How are you feeling?
Oh, good one, man. I'm feeling great. It is also a great day to be great. Semifinals, playoff action. Let's figure some cool stuff out.
Yeah, Week 16, we're into the Final Four in the super majority of fantasy leagues. Dwain, I believe that you have the pleasure and sometimes the pain of being in a number of fantasy leagues with Ian. The all-important Week 16, how are these teams doing?
Well, we've got several teams in the running in playoff shootouts, so that's good. Final 3 weeks of the season, it's just all points, Freedman. You stack up your scores each week to start the postseason. It's your average for the season. Now, Brock Purdy gave us a dud last week, so that team is probably dead. Like, you can't make an error in these point races over the final 3 games. But we'll see if we get lucky in one of these. But I think it's 500,000 in one of them and $1 million in the other one. So, Ian and I, we would be happy to split either one of those.
Dwain, we did make the right move, though. We started Purdy over Jameis. We were all distraught for a couple of days, but in the end, we were right.
I don't know what are the chances? That just doesn't speak very well for our team. The process was right. We got 4 points instead of 2 or something. It was awesome.
Yeah, when being right feels that wrong, it's just time to get onto the off season. All right, let's get into the news here. The big items from yesterday: 2 guys practicing in full, Patrick Mahomes and Geno Smith. Good news for their real life teams. Questionable as to whether you're actually going to start those guys in your fantasy teams this week, but certainly good news for all of the other guys in those offenses who have to rely on Patrick Mahomes and Geno Smith. Dwain, what are your thoughts on Patrick Mahomes, Geno Smith, if we're interested in playing those guys, and then what it means for everyone in their offense?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I don't want Patrick Mahomes or Geno Smith anywhere near a fantasy lineup in the situation where, it's win or go home. Like, I'm out on that scenario. Let's face it, Mahomes hasn't really done it all year. Like, you could maybe look at him as a floor play if we thought he was completely healthy. But yeah, I don't really want any part of that. But Hollywood Brown, is the interesting one. The challenge there, though, Freedman, I don't think we can start him either because we don't know how much playing time he's going to get. Now, he's theoretically coming back from an upper body injury with the sternoclavicular. Was that what it was? Sternoclavicular AC joint, something wild like that. But yeah, so he should be in condition. He's been able to run and stay in shape. So it's just a matter of being on the same page with Mahomes. Like, you would think you would just be able to take Justin Watson's routes. Like, how is Justin Watson getting 50% route participation? Juju's hanging in there at 30, 40%. So it feels like there would be some easy routes to take. So I think Hollywood Brown could be interesting. But again, tough to really get excited about him in fantasy. I think the biggest winner, obviously, is if Geno plays. What we get from Jackson Smith and Jigba. You've got a great matchup against the Vikings. They give up the biggest boost to fantasy wide receivers. Obviously, this would help DK as well, but we're not sure what's going on with DK. Is that shoulder an issue? He's been missing practice, ends up, being able to play, but it hasn't been the same DK we've been used to yet. JSN keeps on doing his thing, even if it means just grabbing a touchdown, to save his day. So I like JSN quite a bit. If we have Geno fully healthy, JSN's a borderline wide receiver 1 this weekend.
Yeah, Ian, we'll talk about DK Metcalf in the rapid report portion of the show. Didn't practice yesterday. JSN has been great. Geno Smith practicing in full. How high are you on JSN this week?
Pretty freaking high, man. Go Buckeyes, obviously, which, just ends up influencing pretty much all of my rankings out here. But no, it's been so impressive throughout the season, especially even last week. Kind of lost amidst the whole Geno injury and just how atrocious Sam Howell was. A lot of fantasy-friendly RB and just kind of lower ADOT usage for JSN. And finally this year, I know the whole storyline's always been about, he just needs to be used more downfield, not enough air yards, which, yeah, we'll take those 2, don't get me wrong. But my man's actually looks good after the catch. That was my big issue with going back and watching his film as a rookie. Yeah, he wasn't getting all these air yards, but he also just didn't even look all that dynamic after the catch. Really has been a turning point this year. And accordingly, he's been the wide receiver 7 or 8 overall on the season. So points per game a little bit lower, but either way, man, really trying to find a way to get in the lineup. But before I move on, Freedman, let me make this about myself for a second, because I've been, ruling Mrs. Hartitz's fantasy team in her work league all year long. The person that set it up messed up and awarded scores 0.5 fantasy points for passing yards. So your quarterback score like 150 points. I have Mahomes and Geno Smith on this team. My team name is my Homelander. I got to go like to Mac Jones or someone if not. So Freedman, not at the Oracle. What should I do?
I mean, I think you're starting Patrick Mahomes, but it's not something that you're actually going to enjoy.
Yeah, fair. Harsh, but fair.
All right. Other news items that we have also practicing in full yesterday, Aiden O'Connell. So I guess the Desmond Ridder hashtag revenge game last week was apparently too cold for the Raiders. Aiden O'Connell likely to start this week. Limited in practice. Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, not really worried about either of those guys. Baker Mayfield did not practice on Wednesday, but monitor, expect that he will be fine. That looks like maintenance. On Thursday Night Football, Justin Herbert with the ankle injury was removed from the injury report, and he will play in Week 16 against the Broncos. Looking at the running back position, placed on IR, Nick Chubb and Sincere McCormick. David Montgomery is getting another opinion on his knee, but still IR remains the likeliest outcome for him. Guys who practiced in full, Roshan Johnson looks like he will be returning from the concussion. Limited practice, Tyrone Tracy, Joe Mixon, Bucky Irving, Braylon Allen. I would expect all of those guys to have a good chance of playing this week. Guys who did not practice on Wednesday and kind of a little bit worried about both Seahawks running backs, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. We should monitor them. But if neither one practices this week, then it looks like Kenny McIntosh would be the lead back for the Seahawks. Also not practicing, Tony Pollard and Trey Benson. Good news for Tajay Spears and James Conner investors. Monitor but not worried. Breece Hall, Isaac Guerrero, neither one practice on Wednesday. Again, not really worried about it. Thursday Night Football, Broncos ruled out Jaleel McLaughlin with a quad injury for Week 16. He is not playing against the Chargers. I don't know if that really matters. Wide receiver news items from the past 24 hours. Guys who did not practice on Wednesday and a little bit worried about. George Pickens looks like he's going to miss his third straight game with a hamstring injury. Monitor him, but I'm skeptical he plays. And the same with Jalen Waddle, Xavier Legette, Alec Pierce, and John Mechie. Nick Westbrook-Ikine did not practice on Wednesday. Not worried about him yet, but definitely monitor the situation. Guys who didn't practice but probably fine: Devontae Smith, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Tyler Boyd, and Sterling Shepard. Hollywood Brown, as mentioned earlier, is practicing in full. Not 100% that he's coming off of IR this weekend to play, but certainly step in the right direction and good chance that he plays. Guys who practiced limitedly on Wednesday: CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Jacoby Myers, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Rashad Bateman. All those guys probably fine. Practice limited, but probably not all that good. Cedric Tillman still dealing with a concussion, still in the league's protocol. Just have to wait for him to clear it in order to play. And then at the tight end position, guys who did not practice on Wednesday: Zach Ertz, David Njoku. Ben Sinnott might be a guy who intrigues in Washington, but not looking good for Ertz and Njoku suiting up this week. And then monitor also Cade Otton, who didn't practice on Wednesday, dealing with a knee issue. If he doesn't practice on Thursday, certainly something to pay more attention to. Brenton Strange, Noah Fant, they did get in limited practices on Wednesday. I would expect that they would be fine. And then Thursday Night Football, Will Dissly is out for the Chargers. Producers, cue the Stone Smart music. So that is the rapid news report. Let's get to the game time ad. All right, Dwain and Ian, there's nothing like being at a game in person, especially around the holidays. I remember with great fondness going to some TCU Bowl games when I was in college. I'm going to be back in Texas for the holidays, and I'm thinking about maybe making the drive to Albuquerque to watch TCU play in the New Mexico Bowl. And if I do, I'm going to get my tickets with Game Time, my go-to for finding amazing tickets for all kinds of events, not just sports. I was scrolling through Game Time, and I came across a new feature, Game Time Picks. It is a total game changer. It curates your experience so you can see the best deals on great seats. Game Time Picks makes finding tickets so easy. It takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's get to the rankings, sponsored by our friends at DraftKings. And let's look at the top 12 in our consensus rankings at Fantasy Life. Of course, everyone be sure to go there, check out the rankings yourself. We update them in real time as news pops up, all the way to kickoff on Thursday, on Saturday, and on Sunday. And at the top of the board, no surprise, Josh Allen, followed by Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, and Jaden Daniels. And then rounding out the top 12, we have Kyler Murray, Sam Darnold, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, and Brock Purdy. All right. The QB riser for the week, Dwain, is Kyler Murray. I wrote him up in my Freedman's Favorites article. You wrote him up as your riser. Talk to me about what you like with Kyler Murray this week going against the Panthers.
Yeah, it's funny how some of these things work. I really try not to read the Freedman's Favorites before I do this piece because I don't want it to influence me too much, but I do always go back and look at it afterwards. And, I don't ever know how to feel about it. Like it on one hand, like I'm really glad. I'm like, okay, like two of us went through a similar process and we came to the same spot. The other name we're going to talk about for Freedman's Favorites is actually my top guy this week. So we're the same on those. But then sometimes I'm like, maybe we need, to be a little bit more different just for the sake of the audience. But then I'm like, no, we would just be forcing it, Freedman. All we can do is follow the data. We came up with two of the same guys on Kyler Murray. So just bear with me for a second. It's going to sound like I'm not upgrading him. Because there are some things that just haven't gone well with Kyler Murray this year. And last week, I was the lowest ranker on him. I refused to put him inside the top 12, despite all of the pressure from Ian Hartitz. And he only gave us 10 fantasy points. So we might want to go back and check the tape on that one. So if you look at Kyler, the big issue for me right now is he's the QB 14 in points per game on the season. So he's really just a borderline QB 1. We don't have a utilization score for quarterbacks because honestly, guys, I have not been able to find anything that's more predictive than just fantasy points. For future fantasy points for quarterbacks. So it's not anything that we force, but the one thing we really do look at, Freeman, Ian, you guys both know this, it's that dual threat upside that typically we get from a quarterback like Kyler, which is the right process. That's why Ian was really on Kyler last week and he liked him. So I couldn't really argue that toughly against it. The challenge for us with Kyler is he just hasn't been doing it, guys. I mean, he ranks 10th right now in design rush rate at 9%. If you look at his scramble rate, it's at 6%. That's not even the top 12 in the league. So he's just not running as much as he used to. And that hurts the floor. We talk about ceiling all the time, but the other great part about getting those rushing yards is, man, when you can tack on 3 to 5 points a game, it turns a 10 into a 15, that sort of thing. We just haven't been getting it from Kyler. Obviously, the other big challenge, which has been a challenge for his tight end, is just the passing touchdowns. We don't get the big blow-up games from Kyler. The yardage has been better lately, but man, this offense really struggles to put the ball in the end zone, especially through the passing game. So those are challenges that have kept me from getting too high on Kyler. So really, it comes down to matchups and other variables, whether he makes it inside my top 12 every week or he's sitting on just the other side because he's not really the dual threat we thought. And this week, he plays the Panthers. So everything's solved, right? When you play the Panthers, you're automatically, it doesn't really matter which position you're going to get to rank inside the top, you're going to get to rank higher in whatever position you're at. And so I do have Kyler at QB 10. I will state I'm still lower than consensus. I think we're 7 right now on the side across the board. I'm pretty sure both of you have Kyler higher than me, but he does make it into the top 12. So yeah, there will be some fantasy teams this week that are probably a little nervous about it. You're in a must-win situation, but I do think you can trust Kyler a little bit more against the Panthers.
Ian, I love how Dwain dunked on you for being too high on Kyler this week, but then also is like, yeah, I'm moving him up the board, but I'm still not as high as Ian is on him this week. Ian, you and I are the highest on the rankers at the staff. We have him at number 7. What is it that you like specifically about him this week that you think maybe has him higher up your board than Dwain's?
Yeah, 6 feet away from getting a couple passing touchdowns to Dortch and Trey McBride. So I think we have actually seen a better passing floor recently, 224 yards in 5 straight games. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but he only hit that mark in 2 of his previous 9 before that. So really just comes down to him not running the ball enough. Can we get Mrs. Murray telling Kyler to run more? Because that was the storyline going with, Lamar Jackson. His mom came out and said, hey, why aren't you running more? And Lamar runs more. So would appreciate that from Kyler because we know he can do it, but at the end of the day, just 25 or more rushing yards in 1 of his last 7 games. So all that said, though, the matchup is pristine. I just think when you start looking at it, guys like Sam Darnold, Jared Goff, Tua, Jordan Love, some of those matchups and some of the potential weather issues just has me, again, using that as a tiebreaker with Mr. Kyler Murray. So I get it hasn't exactly been the blow-up season we're hoping for, but man, we shouted out this schedule stretch weeks ago and about how fantasy-friendly it was going to be, one matchup after another in the fantasy playoffs, and now we're in the midst of it. So my QB 7, Dwain's QB 10. Sounds like we're both starting them.
All right. Certainly at the top of our tier 3 rankings at Fantasy Life, one guy who is not at the top of his tier, Justin Herbert, who is playing tonight on Thursday Night Football, going against the Broncos, who have one of the best pass defenses in the league. Dwayne, he is your QB faller, or one of your QB fallers of the week. What is it you see in this matchup with Herbert?
First, Freeman, I know you like to put an over and an under on everything. What's the over-under on my response time for this question?
2.5 minutes.
Does this count right now?
I'm going to blow you away, Freeman. So Justin Herbert, it's pretty simple. Whenever he's been dealing with an injury this year, it's been terrible. The way they handle the game plan, just the performance overall hasn't been good. He's averaged 11.3 fantasy points in these games where he's been dealing with an ankle injury. You want nothing to do with him. Playing the Broncos, not as good as they had been early in the year. They battled some secondary injuries, here recently. So, I mean, the matchup's a little better than it had been, but still, that's a good defense, a good team. So I want nothing to do with Justin Herbert this week. Even a super flex. I think there are some players like you could be considering around him. I have him as a low-end QB2.
I will say in those betting streets, and by the way, you can check out the free bet tracker that we have at Fantasy Life. I am on the Broncos at +2.5, +3. I do like the under in this game, which also plays the idea that we're not going to see a lot of fantasy points. So I'm certainly with you in spirit on this one. Ian, thoughts on Justin Herbert?
I am excited for this matchup, though. I mean, two of the, I think we could say, probably top 5 defenses in the league. I think if you want to say the Broncos are number 1, I certainly wouldn't call you crazy. Hopeful that we get more of a good low-scoring game versus just a bad football version of scoring. But either way, yeah, not exactly trusting Herbert. QB 18 or worse in each of the past 3 weeks because, yeah, when he's just banged up, guys, it's hard to expect much of anything going from him, particularly on the ground. Just 13 combined rushing yards over these past 3 weeks. Not saying the guy was prime Mike Vick before that, but I know all those Wisconsin fans out there know that this is a guy who can hurt you on the ground when he's healthy, but unfortunately he is not right now. So shout out to Harbaugh. I'm sure he'll have another great speech about how tough Herbert is, and he's right. This is one of the toughest quarterbacks in the league, but sadly, Freeman, we don't get fantasy points for being tough out there. So Justin Herbert, my QB 18, not going to win out on the majority of tiebreakers.
All right, one QB who definitely has my attention this week, and not just because he's playing against my Cowboys. I'm looking at Baker Mayfield, Bucks favorite in this game, a really high total. He is one of my favorites for the week. Now, since the Week 11 bye, he has 5 interceptions in 4 games. That's not good for the season. 14 interceptions and 14 starts. That's just who Baker is. There's always a little bit of bad with the good, but there's been a lot of good with him since he joined the Bucks last year. Over the past 2 seasons, an NFL best 60 touchdowns passing. That doesn't include the 6 he had in the playoffs last year. And even with his 5 interceptions over the past month, he also has over 1,100 yards passing, 8 touchdowns passing in that span, and some rushing production as well, 74 yards and a touchdown on the ground. In 11 games this year, with number 1 wide receiver Mike Evans, Mayfield has finished in the top 10 9 times. So outside of the top 10, just twice. We consensusly, that's a word, consensusly, I just made it up now. We definitely have him all in the top 6. That's just kind of locked in where he belongs. And then especially now that he's going against the Cowboys, who are number 2 in largest fantasy boost allowed to quarterbacks. And then you look at the game total, like the betting lines. I think that also gives you a sense of how this game is going to play out. I bet the over at 47 in the look-ahead market. This has moved up to 48.5. I have this projected at 50 in our Fantasy Life game model. So I'm expecting points in this game. Buccaneers, their games have gone over 9-5. The Cowboys games, they also tend to go over 9-5. So you just have 2 over teams playing against each other. I expect points, and I think that means we should expect a lot of production from Baker Mayfield as the facilitator of that Bucs offense. But sadly, it's going to come against my Cowboys, Dwayne's Cowboys. Ian, I know you pretend to be a Cowboys fan as well. What do you see when you are looking at Baker Mayfield this week?
Pretend. I'm hurt, Freeman. I'm hurt, dog. But okay, I will give the Cowboys a little bit of credit here. Defense has gone from really bad, 27th in EPA allowed per dropback in the first 8 weeks of the season, to actually 6th since week 9. So they have gotten better. And yeah, you put one of the best players in the league back in action in Micah Parsons, and that happens. But here's the thing. I do think the Buccaneers, as we've seen really throughout this entire season, better equipped to handle a good opposing pass rush than maybe any other offense out there. Easily first in the NFL in screen yards yards gained on passes to RBs, and also top 5 in the wide receiver and tight end screen game as well. So I do think that has been, Liam Cohen's, extra twist on this offense. It's just the ease with which this team has moved the ball by not even needing to throw it downfield. So yes, we'll have Mike Evans go out and make his plays, I'm sure, but don't be surprised again if we just see the Buccaneers constantly beating that pass rush with some dink and dunks that Rachaad White and Bucky Irving truly continue to make the most out of. So my QB6, and also shout out to Baker scooting around a little bit here, Freedman. I mean, previous career high in rushing yards per game, which is 10. He's at 19 this year. Already tied a career high with 3 rushing touchdowns. Not saying, again, he's going crazy like Drake May or anyone like that, but certainly separating himself from the Goffs and Staffords of the world, and accordingly having a career year for himself.
Yeah, Baker playing in Texas Stadium. It just feels like he's going to go off. The Texas boy come home. All right, that is the quarterback talk. We're going to get to the running backs, but first, let's kick it to our buddies at Bud Light.
Even if you score, always stay hungry. No matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
All right. We got the running back position here, and our top 12 headed, of course, by Jahmyr Gibbs, number 1, followed by Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Bijan Robinson, and James Conner. And then rounding out the top 12, Kyren Williams, Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Chuba Hubbard, and Joe Mixon for the Texans playing on Saturday against the Chiefs. And then in the top 24, we got Aaron Jones, Rico Dowdle, Jonathan Taylor, Isaac Guerendo, Bucky Irving, Brian Robinson, and then finishing out the top 24, Breece Hall, Rachaad White, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Tyrone Tracy, and Jerome Ford stepping in for the injured Nick Chubb. All right, no surprise that one of the biggest risers of the week is Jahmyr Gibbs. And you think to yourself, how can a guy who is almost always ranked in the top 6 in the running back position anyway move even higher? Well, David Montgomery, presumably out for the year with his knee injury. They're getting second opinions, but certainly out this week against the Bears. And that means Jahmyr Gibbs just unchained with David Montgomery there. How could he not be the RB1? Dwain, talk to us about Jahmyr Gibbs and what we should expect for him without David Montgomery.
Yeah, and look, saying that is still not easy because this is a huge week for running backs, man. We've got absolute studs and absolute smash spots. Jahmyr Gibbs, a 7-point favorite in a great matchup. Saquon Barkley, 4-point favorites with a good team total versus Washington. Chase Brown getting basically every snap for the Bengals, 7-point favorites over the Browns, who are also a good matchup, giving up a big fantasy boost. Josh Jacobs against the freaking Saints with a 14-point advantage. They're supposed to win by 2 touchdowns. Josh Jacobs is going to get absolutely fed, and another good matchup. Bijan Robinson's got a great matchup against the Giants. They're over touchdown favorite. They're at 10. That might have moved since Penix came in, so that one might be more like 9 or 8 now. Freedman, you probably know. But, man, just all these backs. And I haven't got to James Conner, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Man, you could honestly – it was hard to find a way to get a wide receiver into like the top 8 this week. There are so many great running back matchups. So expecting a lot of fantasy points this weekend, guys. And I just hope you're not facing Jahmyr Gibbs. If you have Jahmyr Gibbs on your fantasy team, I mean, this guy is someone who can single-handedly help win you your league. We're talking about a guy that in the games over the last 2 years, Freedman, where he's played at least 60% of the snaps, he's averaged 21.7 fantasy points per game. Last week, obviously, just went bananas, 28.4 points with David Montgomery exiting the game early due to that MCL injury that now has him out for the year. He had 74% of the snaps. He had an 8.7 utilization score. That ties a career high for him. Guess what? He's going to beat that this weekend. So, and the other fun part about Jahmyr Gibbs, you know, like we like Josh Jacobs. He's in a good offense, but like watching Josh Jacobs, you're like, okay, like this is good. It's going to score a touchdown. He's on a good, like Jahmyr Gibbs is amazing. Like when you watch this guy run, like he reminds me of Jamal Charles, honestly. Like it's a 5 yards per carry kind of thing. I think is sustainable for the guy, even if you give him more carries, just because he is so electric with the ball in his hand. So yeah, if you got Jahmyr Gibbs, you're feeling really great about it. And then you also get the matchup against the Bears. It really wouldn't matter who he's playing, but he does get a choice matchup as well. The number 2 fantasy boost to running backs this year at plus 5.6. So you got the matchup. You got the full-time role. You got an offense that just scores touchdowns almost like nobody else in the NFL. He checks all the boxes, Freeman.
All right, Ian, Jahmyr Gibbs in his 6 games with Montgomery either out or having a snap share of no more than 30%, 683 yards and 6 touchdowns. So, I mean, do we just automatically expect, hey, this guy's going to have 100 yards and a touchdown for us? Is that just the expectation this week?
Pretty much, man. Just a good example that, all this patience really pays off. We got this guy, he's been sitting on our bench all season, just, a prospective handcuff stash. And you take away David Montgomery, and all of a sudden we can put the RB4 on the season as the RB1. So just, Jahmyr Gibbs, can't wait. Finally get to play him this week. Great call, guys.
Ian, I'm sensing something over there. I'm not sure about the exact way of characterizing it, but it's as if you think that moving Jahmyr Gibbs up the ranks from like RB4 to RB1 is not like sufficient to be like, hey, he's a riser.
We can keep talking about the number 1 overall player in fantasy all we want. I'd like to hit some, tougher questions, if you will. But yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs, I like him a lot, guys. He's my number 1 player of the week. How about that?
All right. One guy who's not the number 1 player, Najee Harris. I mean, the faller that you have highlighted in your article going against the Ravens. So tough matchup, and obviously in a timeshare committee with Jaylen Warren. What are you seeing when you look at Najee Harris this week, Dwain?
Yeah, so with Najee Harris, the struggle is since these last 6 games, whenever we've had Jaylen Warren and Cordarrelle Patterson back, it has not been good for him. Like, he is not getting really any of the passing down work. You see Ian, giving you guys a gesture there. That's because he is the king of the Cordarrelle Patterson fan club. Cordarrelle Patterson has actually DM'd this guy and told him, he really appreciates the support. So Cordarrelle Patterson loves Ian Hartitz, like we all do. So whenever you look at Harris, when we've had this situation now where you got Patterson and you've got Jaylen Warren in the game, he's only gotten, his route participation has been below 30% in 4 of the last 6 games, Freedman. So what that does is that makes him game script dependent. We are really now looking at a player that the only way he gives you fantasy points is if the game goes right and he scores you a rushing touchdown. Earlier in the year, he was getting enough of that passing down work that he could pick up some of those receptions to save you in PPR leagues. That's really gone. You got a matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, who've held rushing attacks to 36 yards below their average. It's one of the toughest matchups in the NFL. Now, the way you get around that against the Ravens is if you're a pass catcher. The pass catching backs have actually been able to kind of have an okay floor. Now, it didn't work for Tyrone Tracy last week. He scored under 5 fantasy points. So it's just a real tough spot right now for Najee Harris, having to share too much of the backfield. Not the kind of matchup that really favors what he does for the offense. So I think he's more of a high-end running back 3, someone that more weeks than not, like is a running back 2, anywhere from mid-range running back 2 to low-end running back 2 for us. Now looking more like a high-end running back 3. So that means he's eligible to be on quite a few benches heading into a huge matchup for the fantasy playoffs.
All right, Ian, we could talk about Najee Harris, but as the king, the president of the Cordarrelle Patterson fan club, I want to ask you a question here. I'm going off the script. I'm sure the producers are going to be like, oh no, where's this going? Cordarrelle Patterson, Hall of Famer. All right, make the case for Cordarrelle Patterson as a Hall of Famer.
With the Hall of Fame, what we're trying to do at the end of the day is help tell the history of football. And I don't know how you can have that lovely building in Canton, Ohio, without recognizing the single greatest kick returner in the history of the game. Chill out, Bears fans. We're not talking about punts here. We're talking about kicks. Kicks start off every single game. What's the most memorable moment of the Super Bowl? The kickoff. And who has been the best man in the history of the game, objectively speaking, at returning those kicks? None other than CPAT. So we shouldn't blame him for the NFL playing him at the wrong position for the first 6 years of his career. All he's done since is go out there, perform as a wide receiver, RB hybrid, returning kicks better than anyone, winning some Super Bowls out here for the Patriots back in the day, just overall doing a bunch of king shit out here. So CPAT, number 1 in your programs, number 1 in your hearts, get him in the Hall of Fame.
All right. So that was your Najee Harris / Cordarrelle Patterson segment of the show. One guy who has my eye, James Conner. We talked about him. I believe our consensus number 6 running back, and just an absolute great spot for him. And really, sometimes it's as simple as just kind of like looking at what has happened recently. Like, oh, James Conner last week, 138 yards and 2 touchdowns on 16 carries and 5 targets in a 30-17 win over the Patriots. And then you look at the Panthers and what they allowed last week to Cowboys running back Rico Dowdle in a 30-14 win that the Cowboys had. Dowdle had 149 yards on 25 carries. The Cardinals are better than the Cowboys. Conner is better than Dowdle. The Patriots are probably better than the Panthers. And the Panthers, number one and largest fantasy boost allowed to running backs at plus 7.8. Like sometimes it is really just that simple. Like the transitive property suggests that Connor is going to have a big performance, and then especially no Amari DiMercado and potentially no Trey Benson, who exited last week with an ankle injury and didn't practice on Wednesday. So it could just be a clear path to a massive workload for James Conner this week going against the Panthers. Cardinals favored by 4.5 points now in this game. It could continue to move even more in their direction. I think a big workload for James Conner. Ian, what are your thoughts on Conner this week?
Yeah, I mean, the Panthers have allowed 363 more rushing yards to opposing RBs than any other defense. 363, guys. They've all played the same amount of games at this point. Just a bonkers number. So feeling amazing about the matchup. We're feeling amazing about James Conner, the talent. He leads all running backs this year in missed tackles force. Cardinals offense implied to score the 6 most points of the week, right there with the Ravens. So we're loving that. And also the touches, man. We've gotten 20 plus of them in 6 of the last 8 games. So ultimately, I do think that most, fantasy start sit decisions boil around those 4 variables: your matchup, your workload, your offensive scoring upside, and just the talent of the individual player. Conner is checking each of those boxes and accordingly top 6 of the position. So another guy who I think we could see this somewhat coming a few weeks ago, given just the one great fantasy matchup after another in the playoffs. And accordingly, hopefully he's putting together another RB1 finish.
All right, so that was the running backs. Let's get to the wide receivers. But first, let's take a look at our friends at Knockaround. Hello, holiday shoppers. It is a great time to head over to knockaround.com and pick up a pair of polarized shades for you or someone else for less than $50. And with over 25 frame styles and dozens of colors, you're guaranteed to find sunglasses that look good and protect your eyes with full UV 400 protection. And be sure to check out Knockaround's officially licensed NFL collection so you can rep your team all week and hopefully all the way through the playoffs. Visit knockaround.com and use code LIFE for free shipping on your order. All right, Knockaround, just great glasses. Just absolutely love this stuff. All right, let's get to the wide receivers here. Top 24. Starting at number 1, we've got Jamar Chase, followed by Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, Nico Collins, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then rounding out the top 12, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, and Brian Thomas Jr. And then we've got in the bottom half of the top 24, Courtland Sutton, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, after having the goose egg last week, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we talked about earlier in the show, Garrett Wilson, Jawan Jennings, and then rounding out the top 24, Ladd McConkey, Drake London, Malik Neighbors, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, and Jacoby Myers. All right. In terms of the risers at the wide receiver position, we're looking at Cooper Kupp. And I wrote about him in the favorites article. Dwain, you wrote about him in the risers article. I mean, look, what happened last week broke my heart. And if you have Cooper Kupp on your team, there's a chance you're not even listening to a fantasy podcast at this point because you're just out of fantasy. But if you survived Cooper Kupp last week, make the case for why you are going back to him this week.
Hey, look, real life. My son survived Cooper Kupp and Derrick Henry. Somehow. Wow. Brenton Strange is what did it. He had to bench David Njoku, and Brenton Strange went nuts. That was his waiver wire pickup. And it was also his kicker, Reichard, for the Vikings. So shout out to a kicker on the show. We never do that, but Reichard helped power him past a really good opponent. So yeah, this happened to a lot of people. Hopefully a lot of you are alive, like Camden still is. But whenever we look at Cooper Kupp, yeah, you mentioned it. You had the absolute dud last week. And we have to face reality here, Freedman. This is not the same Cooper Kupp that we knew over the last 2 to 3 seasons. Certainly not that MVP caliber season that we saw a couple of years back when he just went absolute bananas. But he still has a very high ceiling. I know he gave you that dud last week. When you look at his utilization scores, yeah, they've come down. He's at a 6.5 in the games where we had Puka Nacua not getting, thrown out for, a weak punch, in that second game back in week 9. So if we get rid of that game, Kupp's averaging 14.9 fantasy points. Again, not a guy locked into getting 10, 12 targets every single week and doing a lot with those. But we have seen this situation, Freedman, where he is still hitting those highs. If we go back and even looking at the games with Puka Nacua, he's giving you 16, he gave you 15, he gave you 29, he gave you 20, gave you a dud of 4.7, then gave you a 20 before giving you the 0. So there's just too many 20s in there, man, to not get this guy into your lineup. I'm with Ian. Like, if you guys want a lot of the guys that are lower down our ranks, like, you can go check out the article. It's for free over at fantasylife.com. And we've got a lot of these other guys like Brian Thomas, a bunch of names, but we had to talk about Cooper Kupp because honestly, I've already gotten a ton of questions about him. Like in my DMs on Twitter, been getting pinged over in the Discord streets. Hey, what do we do with Kupp? Like, we made it through. Can we start him? I just don't think you can bench him, Freedman. You're playing the Jets. I know that was a tough matchup early in the year. And if you're just looking at season data, you would think, okay, that's probably a slightly negative matchup. Still, maybe a neutral matchup. No. Over the last 4 games, this has been a defense that you really do want to attack. And it doesn't really matter how. You can do it either way, but the air has been better. They've encouraged a 6.5-point fantasy boost to opposing pass catchers over the last 4 weeks. So really nothing like what we saw over the first month of the season with that Jets pass defense. It kind of helped them carry through in the ranks for a long time. So good matchup. Too much ceiling here for Cooper Kupp. And, man, don't you just feel like his buddy Matthew Stafford is going to want to put him back on the map? I mean, a 0-point dud. I feel like we get a big blow-up game right here from Cooper Kupp. I have him in the top 12.
Yeah, I mean, for everyone who's survived, like all the Harry Potters out there who survived the killing curse from Cooper Kupp, all right, maybe the Avada Kedavra curse, it didn't hit on you. All right, this week, great matchup, actually. I think underappreciated matchup. The Jets are really injured in the secondary. Slot cornerback Michael Carter exited last week with a back injury. Perimeter corner DJ Reed was out last week with a groin injury. Brandon Eccles, one of their top backup cornerbacks, is out with a shoulder injury. And free safety Jalen Mills also exited last week with a chest injury. They could be without 3 starters and a top backup in the secondary, which makes Cooper Kupp really interesting. Ian, where are you on Kupp this week?
Top 15. I think you guys hit all the main points. I do have a fun stat, though, for everyone, because as we've seen, Puka Nacua kind of taken over as the Rams wide receiver 1. I'm with Dwain. It was a weak punch that got him ejected. But since then, 6 straight games with at least 15 PPR points. That's tied with Chase Brown for the longest, current streak in the NFL. Longest streak with 15 plus PPR points since 2000. Cooper Kupp during the 2021-2022 seasons. Freedman, can you guess the longest streak in NFL history with at least 15 PPR points? Hint, it happened during the 1994 and 1995 seasons.
I would hope Jerry Rice.
Emmitt Smith. Go Cowboys. That's all I got.
There we go. There we go. That's a good one. All right. Well, look, for every riser, there must be a faller. And I will say, I put this guy in my Freedman's Favorites article, wrote it up, and then it was announced that Jameis Winston was not starting. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm keeping him in there. But Dwain, you are putting him down the ranks. Jerry Jeudy versus the Bengals. Decent matchup, but potentially the quarterback situation just too much for you to be enthusiastic about Jerry Jeudy this week. Why have you bumped him down the rankings?
Yeah, I mean, really good matchup against the Bengals, man. And these have been shootouts with the Bengals. Like, we were excited. Ian and I talked about it on Sunday night. Please, God, just give us Jameis versus the Bengals. That's all we're asking for. But look, you got the Browns as 7.5-point dogs. Like, we don't have a very high team total. It was sitting at 19.8 yesterday. Freedman, you're the expert here. That feels too high to me. Honestly, with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, those are the 3 words you got to worry about here. This guy's a 51% career completion rate. He's also going to turn more of the dropbacks to scrambles. I also would expect the Browns to run the ball more. So you can't complete passes. You're going to turn actual passing plays into scrambles. You're going to get less passing plays from this team. It's just going to be it's really hard, honestly, to find someone like Jerry Jeudy that you're going to see fall more than what you're going to look at versus last week's ranks versus this week's ranks. I honestly would not blame anyone if you moved him all the way down to boom bust wide receiver 4 territory. I think that's legit on the table. I moved him down to low end boom bust wide receiver 3 status. I mean, this is and he's my brass balls bench player of the week. Like, if there's a guy that's been running super hot, but like you've got the stomach to just go ahead and bench him. And I honestly don't even think it's that hard, depending on who else you have. I do think Jerry Jeudy is actually benchable this weekend. This is a terrible, terrible development for all of the Browns pass catchers. You can take everything I just said. You can apply it to David Njoku. Elijah Moore's off the map. Cedric Tillman. All of these guys get a massive downgrade.
Ian, I want your thoughts on this because we talked earlier at the top of the show. Cedric Tillman still yet to clear the concussion protocol. David Njoku, dealing with a hamstring injury, didn't practice at all last week, didn't practice on Wednesday this week. I'm tentatively expecting him to be out. No Nick Chubb either. And so you think, who is going to get the ball within this offense? And certainly Jerome Ford makes a case for that. But in the pass catching area, even with Dorian Thompson-Robinson as the quarterback, if Tillman is out and Njoku is out, Jeudy still has a chance of getting double-digit targets. And maybe those aren't quality double-digit targets, but he still has a shot at them. Do you think you can actually bench Jerry Jeudy this week?
Yeah, I hear the whole volume thing going on. It is a good matchup, but we already actually got a preview of this earlier this year in DTR's one extended appearance against the Bengals when he had 82 yards and 2 interceptions on 24 pass attempts. Like, again, Browns fans, you guys have been going through a lot. I understand it. And we can sit here and show you all the horrible Deshaun Watson statistics ever since he's gotten to Cleveland. But I kid you not, one of the very few quarterbacks in the NFL who have actually been quantifiably worse than Watson is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So I don't know. I mean, maybe the Browns have just made their peace with the fact that they're not going to re-sign Jameis. Maybe they actually do believe that they can get more out of DTR. I don't see it, though. And really, it is just a situation where we probably are looking at the single worst quarterback in the NFL starting for Cleveland this Sunday. So it sucks. I mean, Jeudy, wide receiver 7 since week 8. Heck of a, just, I guess, comeback year for him overall. But my wide receiver 34 on the week. Give me guys like Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley. And to Dwayne's point, I don't even think it's really close.
All right. Well, going from one wide receiver with a quarterback change to another, I am looking at Drake London going against the Giants. Now, Drake London had just 3 targets last week. That was a disappointment, but he still had 53 yards and a touchdown. And in 3 games since the week 12 bye, 29 targets and a carry. He's turned that into 206 yards and a touchdown. And the usage has been really great. He's got an elevated floor with that usage, 98% route rate, 43% share of the air yards since the bye. And then the matchup is really intriguing to me, going against the Giants, who are number 29 in defensive dropback EPA. And last week they were without not 1, not 2, but all 3 starting cornerbacks. Deonte Banks was out with a rib injury. Cordell Flott was out with a quadriceps, and Andrew Phillips was out with a shoulder. Even better, those are guys you probably don't even know their names anyway. Now, if you don't know their names, imagine the backups who are out there. So this could be an absolute smash spot for Drake London. The potential problem is that Michael Penix Jr. is now starting for the Falcons. And on the one hand, you look at Kirk Cousins and you think, how can Penix not be an upgrade on what we've seen out of Cousins recently? At the same time, I'm not saying the betting market is the truth, but the betting market, when the team announced the move from Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix Jr., the spread moved against the Falcons and the total dropped, which is basically the betting market saying we're not expecting the same number of points out of this offense as we previously were. Now, I will say, with Michael Penix Jr., there's a lot of unknown. There's a possibility that he is better than Kirk Cousins. There's the possibility that he's able to maneuver around the pocket, that they can open up the playbook, that he's more willing to attack downfield and give Drake London opportunities to create big plays. So I think this is a wide range of outcomes type of situation. And I'm just going to be optimistic for once and think that Michael Penix Jr. maybe gives Drake London a better chance for a big game than what we were seeing out of Kirk Cousins. Ian, what are your thoughts on Drake London?
I'd be very interested to see what kind of game plan Zach Robinson comes in with, because it's been very, I think left a lot to be desired all season long. But we've always had that caveat with how limited Kirk Cousins has been. Well, what else is he supposed to do? I mean, only 4% of Cousins dropbacks this season, guys, have actually involved him leaving the pocket. Joe Flacco at 7% is the only other guy under 12%. So again, then you add in the weak arm, coming back from the Achilles injury, and generally just being an old man at this point. And at least Penix is giving them a chance to force defenses to have to defend, larger areas of the field on a snap-to-snap basis. So despite all that, Drake London has 60-plus yards or a touchdown in 12 of 14 games this year. So I am optimistic on London at least continuing to keep on keeping on largely. But hopefully we do see more of an emphasis on the pass game, because since week 6, guys, only the Eagles actually have been more run-heavy than the Falcons in terms of drop-back rate over expected. So that'd be my concern, Freedman. It is the Giants. It is an offense with Bijan, Tyler Algier. Maybe they don't need Penix to drop back more than 20 or 25 times out there. But when he is, I'm excited to see what he can do.
All right. That's enough for talking about the wide receivers. Let's get to the guys who really matter, the tight ends. All right. And number 1 on the board in our top 12. Let's see here. We have Trey McBride. Dude, I'm going to be talking about in a little bit, followed by George Kittle, Brock Bowers, Jonnu Smith at number 4, Sam Laporta, and Travis Kelce at number 6. Rounding out the top 12, we have TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Pat Freiermuth, Tucker Kraft, Cade Otton, and Brenton Strange. What a time to be alive, Brenton Strange in the top 12. All right. At number 1, we have Trey McBride, and he's the guy I want to talk about. In each week, I read the Sheesh Report. I think it is an amazing piece of content. And this week, one guy you mentioned in there, sadly, Trey McBride, who is yet to have a receiving touchdown this year. Last week, the team schemed up a play for him that they're like, this is the one that's going to get him into the end zone. And he gets tackled at the 1-yard line. Some real sheesh stuff. Even so, great matchup this week. Panthers, number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Number 1 on the season is Trey McBride in the Whopper metric, which is weighted opportunity rating. Basically, how much of the team's share of targets and air yards does a guy get? Trey McBride, number 1 at the position. The dude is putting up like wide receiver numbers, just not scoring the touchdowns. I think he gets into the end zone this week. Ian, what are your thoughts on Trey McBride?
Yeah, and I mean, what's even funnier about just getting stopped at the 1-yard line last week is they were at the 1. They did, kind of that Chiefs special underhand shovel pass. Like, they are trying so hard to get him a touchdown, to the point that Kyler Murray's even going on TikTok saying that 85 will touch the end zone soon, and he promises. So what better matchup to find the end zone than against the Panthers? But yeah, 15, 12, 14, and 10 targets over the course of these past 4 weeks, and he's still been a top 4 tight end every time. So even without the touchdown, guys, he's still putting up bonkers numbers, and I think making a really compelling case to be the first overall tight end off the boards in 2025. I know Brock Bowers has been incredible, but guess what? Brock Bowers still is going to have a QB question under center, even if the Raiders are using the number 1 overall pick on the position. And Trey McBride, again, as great as Bowers has been, McBride right there with him. So I'm with you, Freedman. Just let's please get the man a receiving touchdown. We need it.
All right. That's enough tight end talk. We talked about one guy. This still feels like too much. It's week 16. Let's talk about the things that really matter, and that is where we diverge from each other in the rankings. I want to start by looking at the quarterback position. Bo Nix, and you have him at QB 17. I have him at QB 12. Make the case for why you are thinking in most leagues, not super flex or anything like that, but most leagues, why you are benching Bo Nix this week.
We haven't seen the same rushing floor recently. I mean, 23 rushing yards last week. That was his first time in 4 games he had more than just 5. So working within the confines of the offense, I get it. But I do think when you are purely relying on passing goodness, that, let's face it, mostly being schemed by Sean Payton, we all see the pass catchers he's throwing to every week. It's risky when you are facing a really good defense like the Chargers, who happen to be tied for first in the NFL in points per game allowed. So, hey, Nix, I think relative to expectations and just relative to being a rookie, has been an awesome surprise this season. But I think we have in our heads that he's been this massive upgrade over Russell Wilson. And guys, it just hasn't been the case. The Broncos were 16th in points per game last year. They're 15th this year. 20th in yards per play last year, 23rd this year. EPA per dropback, again, even a little bit worse than last year. The real difference is this Broncos defense going from one of the single worst units in the league to one of the very best. So shout out, I would say, to Pat Surtain and company, a bit more to some offensive turnaround. Things have been smoother. I get it. I got a ton of Broncos fans telling me to watch the games right after I pointed this out. I do, I promise. But yeah, guys, I just think, again, Bo Nix, a bit more of this game manager and an offense we don't love in a tough matchup. And accordingly, for week 16, I got him lower in the ranks because, it's not week 12 anymore.
To your point about it's not week 12, that is almost why I do have Bo Nix at number 12. Like, am I trusting Anthony Richardson in week 16? Like, certainly, like, Richardson has a high floor, but also, like, it just absolutely painful floor as well, that, like, he could just fall through.
High ceiling, low floor.
Yeah. High ceiling, low floor. Where you think he has the high floor because of the rushing ability, but he's also got like the painful floor that he could just fall through if he throws interceptions and like, you know what? It's Joe Flacco time. So like, I can't trust Anthony Richardson above Bo Nix, even though like Anthony Richardson, like in theory, is the like better fantasy player. Like a number of guys, I just feel like I can't trust this week. Like Patrick Mahomes, we talked about him earlier. I just don't think I can trust him. But Bo Nix, I think he has a reasonably high floor. And I will say that Chargers defense, just not quite as good now as it was earlier in the year. And they haven't been especially as good against teams that I think do have the capability to open up the passing game a little bit. And I do think the Chargers or the Broncos rather do have that, even though we don't see it on a week-to-week basis. I do think they could scheme it up. And then also this game indoors, I think could also just have an environment that is a little less hostile than some of the other environs that we see sometimes in December. All right, the next discrepancy that we have in rankings, I am looking at Breece Hall. Ian, you have him RB 26, Dwain RB 18. So questions as to, Breece Hall didn't practice on Wednesday. I'm assuming he plays this week. Also, some of the backup running backs behind him practice on a limited basis. So we need to monitor the injury report and all of that. But Dwain, what do you like about Breece Hall this week?
Yeah, we're all pretty close. Like you're sitting Freedman at 22, Charge 21, Ian's a little lower at 26. He's in a tier of guys here where the injury report stuff really will matter. Like it's going to shuffle up what we have right here. So I've got him one spot ahead right now of Brian Robinson Jr., but honestly, like I like Brian Robinson better as far as like his role, but he's got a really tough matchup against the Eagles. So I feel like that's close if Breece Hall's healthy, especially if somehow Braylon Allen didn't play, which is kind of where I was whenever I made the rankings on Tuesday. You look at Tony Pollard, another guy that's in a part-time role like Breece Hall. Okay, he's got probably a slightly better matchup against the Colts, but also dealing with an injury. So I've got him right there below Breece Hall. I've got Kenneth Walker, who may not even play this week, but again, could share some time with Charbonnet. But now Charbonnet's hurt. He's dealing with an oblique injury. So there's just a lot going on here. DeAndre Swift is another name. Are we going to get Roschon Johnson or are we not? If we're not getting Roschon Johnson back, I'm probably moving DeAndre Swift up there right around Hall, maybe above him. So it just comes down to some unknowns, but it's a tier of guys that are in part-time roles or they've got tough matchups, right? And there's like 7 or 8 of them all together. You can throw Rashad White into that conversation as well. So again, this section of the ranks, like that specific tier is going to change a lot as we get more information.
All right. Ian, what do you like about, or what do you dislike rather about Breece Hall?
I'm with Dwain, where I think, again, it's kind of this big 6 or 7 running back tier where, when he is 8 spots ahead of me, I don't think it's, particularly egregious. I would let you guys know, believe me, if I did. But yeah, with Breece, again, a situation where his workload is moving in the wrong direction and you're playing under 50% of the snaps last week. If we are going to see Braylon and Isaiah Davis healthy, I am concerned about, again, not moving up in a significant manner. And then we have a Jets scoring offense that, I think we can say at this point, we don't exactly love the upside of. And Breece Hall himself, let's face it, hasn't exactly been the world's most efficient running back. So matchup against the Rams isn't exactly a deal breaker, but they are the 4th most improved rush defense over the course of the second half of the season. Still have plenty to play for. So Breece Hall, sad to say, I just think he's more of this, kind of mid-tier, borderline RB2, I should say, than the guy who needs to be jammed in the lineups.
All right, let's close it out with the mother of all rankings discrepancies here. Deebo Samuel. This is painful. Dwain has him at wide receiver 37, which is basically his way of saying, I don't want to start this guy. And Ian, you have him at wide receiver 53, which is your way of saying, I really do not want this guy even on my teams. Dwain, why are you higher than Ian on Deebo?
I just wasn't able to make as bold of a statement as Ian. Maybe I should. Hat tip to him. Honestly, like I wanted to get him outside the top 36. You're exactly right, Freeman. I kept moving him until he wasn't in the top 36 anymore, because that's pretty much the cutoff for a lot of these leagues. But again, like if you look at Debo, and Ian's going to have a great argument here because Debo sucked. Debo has sucked. Debo's not giving you anything for a long time. So I don't really have much of a leg to stand on. The one thing that I will say is I just start looking at the names around him, Freedman, and I start thinking tomato, right? Okay, I get here to Josh Downs. We've got issues. It's a coin flip. You just talked about Anthony Richardson and how bad he can be. Jaden Reed, fine, I'll give him the nod, but Jaden Reed, just like lucky if you score some touchdowns, not really getting that many targets. If you look at Rome Odunze, the third option in an offense is highly volatile with Caleb Williams, Darnell Mooney, now with Michael Penix, and Mooney's really been trending downward. Michael Pittman, Jalen McMillan, like there's another huge tier of guys here. And I will say, I can't argue with anyone that would want to say they would want to put Debo below all those guys. But I could also make an easy argument that he just belongs in that tier, and you can eat Arby's and do whatever you want. And you can think that you can predict which one of these guys are going to go off. And you know what? You're just kidding yourself. You're absolutely fooling yourself. I don't think there's any strong data points around a lot of these guys that make them like, guys we're just going to, pound the table for. These segments are kind of funny because we all know this. Like when you're making weekly rankings, there's so much volatility. It really is about grouping guys together. And Debo's in a pretty big blob here. I will say he's eclipsed 20% of the target share in 3 of the last 5 games. So they're trying to get him the ball, which basically puts him in this group of guys.
Yeah, the strongest case to be made for Debo above that group of guys is we know his name. Ian, why are you against Debo this week?
I think I'm being generous, guys. I have him wide receiver 53. He hasn't finished better than wide receiver 55 in 5 straight games. I mean, his squeaky wheel spot was still only 7 targets and 2 rush attempts. And the rush attempts at this point just aren't worth anything. Only Trey Sermon's been less efficient in terms of his yards per carry on the season. So at the end of the day, we just have to at some point take this production and efficiency at face value. Maybe it's those lingering injuries. Maybe it's in his head at this point. Obviously dropped that one slant last week that could have been a touchdown. So, yeah, it's just a situation where we've seen it enough times. Deebo Samuel, for me, outside the top 50. Dwayne didn't want to see him in the top 36 on our Fantasy Life rankings. We usually show the top 50 players. I didn't even want him on the first page, guys. So I got him off there feeling good about it.
All right, so down on Debo, but up on the show, of course. That is going to do it for this Week 16 Fantasy Life Rankings episode. Be sure to catch out our episode tomorrow, as well as the great content, tools, rankings that we have on the site. For Ian and Dwayne, I'm Matt Freedman. And remember, it's not a fantasy if you believe it.